Picture this. Somewhere on a war-torn battlefield, in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, two towering war machines locked in mortal combat. A loyalist space marine dreadnought, its ceramite armor bearing the proud heraldry of the Adeptus Astartes, exchanges thunderous blows with a twisted chaos hellbrute, corrupted metal screaming with demonic rage. Their weapons light up the devastated landscape as they tear into each other with the accumulated fury of warriors who have fought for centuries, perhaps millennia. The ground shakes with each thunderous step. Assault cannons roar. Power fists crush armor. Ancient warriors, entombed in walking sarcophagi, wage a battle that neither can afford to lose. And then the Orks arrive. What happens next is perhaps one of the most quintessentially Warhammer 40,000 scenarios imaginable. It combines the brutal warfare of the setting with the unique psychology of the greenskin menace, creating a situation that is simultaneously horrifying, absurd, and utterly captivating. To understand what unfolds when Orks discover two enemy dreadnoughts locked in combat requires us to explore the nature of these alien warriors, the terrible machines they encounter, and the twisted logic that governs their actions. This is a tale that captures everything that makes the 41st millennium such a compelling setting. The horror of eternal war, the tragedy of fallen heroes, and the darkly comedic brutality of a galaxy where there is only war. The scenario we're examining today isn't just a theoretical exercise. Throughout the countless battlefields that span the Imperium of man and beyond, encounters like this have played out across thousands of years. Every time they occur, they reveal fundamental truths about the nature of the Ork species and their relationship with violence. These moments, where greenskins stumble upon conflicts between other factions, offer unique insights into what makes Orks perhaps the most distinctive and dangerous Xenos threat in the entire galaxy. To properly explore this scenario, we need to understand all the pieces on this particular board. We must delve into the Ork psyche, examining what drives these fungal warriors and what they find entertaining. We need to comprehend the nature of dreadnoughts themselves, both loyalist and corrupted, to grasp the significance of what the Orks are witnessing. Only then can we truly appreciate the chaos, the spectacle, and the inevitable violence that erupts when these elements collide. The meeting of these forces creates a perfect storm of destruction that exemplifies the endless warfare that defines this universe. The importance of understanding this scenario extends beyond mere curiosity. It reveals the Ork approach to warfare, their values, their social structure, and their unique position in the galaxy as a species that exists purely for conflict. While other races fight for survival, ideology, or conquest, Orks fight because fighting is what they were made to do. It is their purpose, their joy, their entire reason for existence. When they encounter a battle already in progress, especially one as spectacular as two dreadnoughts trying to destroy each other, their response tells us everything we need to know about why the Ork threat has persisted for millennia and will likely continue for millennia more. Before we can explore what happens when these scenarios unfold, we must establish the context. Dreadnoughts don't just fight anywhere for any reason. When loyalist and chaos forces clash, it represents a confrontation between the forces of the Imperium and those who have turned their backs on the Emperor of mankind. These are battles of ideology as much as territory, conflicts where ancient grudges dating back 10,000 years to the Horus heresy are played out again and again. The dreadnoughts themselves are relics of ages past, warriors who should have died, but were instead bound into mechanical shells to fight on eternally. Their battles carry the weight of history, of betrayal, of brothers turned against brothers. When Orks intrude upon such a conflict, they bring with them an entirely different set of values and motivations. They don't care about the Emperor. They don't understand the religious significance of the battle. The ancient feuds and theological arguments that drive the conflict between loyalist and traitor mean absolutely nothing to them. What they see is simply two massive walking war machines trying to tear each other apart, and to an Ork, that is perhaps the most entertaining thing imaginable. The juxtaposition of these perspectives creates a scenario that is both tragic and absurd, highlighting the fundamental differences between how various factions approach warfare in the 41st millennium. Understanding the Ork psychology. To comprehend what happens when Orks encounter two Dreadnoughts fighting, we must first understand the Ork mind, such as it is. The Orks are not simply mindless brutes, though many of their enemies make that fatal mistake. They possess a form of intelligence, albeit one that operates on fundamentally different principles than human thinking. The Ork brain is wired for one primary function: combat. Everything else in their existence revolves around this central pillar. Food, shelter, technology, social organization, all of these are secondary concerns that exist only to facilitate the real business of life, which is fighting. The Ork relationship with violence is fundamentally different from other species. Where humans might fight out of necessity, self-defense, or strategic calculation, Orks fight because fighting makes them happy. It's not hyperbole to say that Orks need combat the way humans need food and water. Their entire physiology reinforces this drive. When Orks fight, they grow larger and stronger. The more successful an Ork becomes in battle, the bigger he gets. And size among Orks directly correlates with status and authority. This creates a society where warfare isn't just encouraged, but is the primary mechanism for social advancement and personal growth. This biological imperative toward violence is reinforced by the Ork concept of the WH40K. This term serves multiple purposes in Ork society, functioning as a battle cry, a description of military campaigns, and most importantly, a gestalt psychic field generated by the collective consciousness of the Ork race. When Orks gather in large numbers, and their excitement for battle builds, they generate a psychic phenomenon that makes them collectively stronger, faster, and more resilient. The WH40K energy flows through them, turning a disorganized mob of greenskins into a genuinely terrifying military force. This psychic field also explains how Ork technology functions, despite appearing to be little more than scrap metal, held together with belief and violence. The WH40K isn't just about power, though. It's also about joy. Orks genuinely enjoy fighting in a way that seems almost alien to other species. They laugh as they charge into battle. They make jokes while crushing their enemies. They view warfare not as a grim necessity, but as the best possible way to spend their time. This attitude permeates every level of Ork society, from the lowliest Gretchen to the mightiest war boss. It creates a culture where the greatest praise one Ork can give another is to acknowledge that he's good in a fight, and the worst insult is to suggest that an Ork might prefer to avoid combat. This brings us to a critical aspect of Ork psychology: their appreciation for a good scrap. Orks don't just want to fight, they want quality fights. While they'll happily brawl with anyone or anything, Orks particularly enjoy battles that are challenging, spectacular, or entertaining. They tell stories about the best fights they've witnessed or participated in. They compete with each other to be involved in the most impressive conflicts. An Ork who has fought against a particularly dangerous enemy gains status and respect among his peers. The concept of a proper scrap is deeply ingrained in Ork culture, representing the ideal battle that combines worthy opponents, spectacular violence, and preferably some element of unpredictability or surprise. When Orks witness combat between other factions, their response is shaped by these values. They don't immediately think about strategic implications or territorial advantage. Their first instinct is to evaluate the fight on its entertainment value. Is it a good scrap? Are the combatants putting on a proper show? This perspective might seem juvenile or simplistic, but it reflects a fundamental truth about Ork nature. They are connoisseurs of violence. They have preferences, opinions, and standards when it comes to warfare. A boring fight where one side quickly dominates the other holds little interest for them, but a prolonged, evenly matched battle between powerful opponents, That's the kind of thing that draws orcs from across the battlefield. The orc appreciation for spectacle extends to their behavior as an audience. When orcs watch a fight they're not participating in, they don't remain passive observers. They cheer, they jeer, they make commentary, they place bets, and they loudly debate the merits and flaws of each combatant's fighting style. This behavior isn't just random noise. It reflects the orc understanding of combat and their deep engagement with warfare as both participants and observers. They treat fights like humans might treat sporting events, except with far more bloodshed and the ever-present possibility that the audience might decide to join in. This collective engagement with combat as entertainment has important implications for what happens when orcs encounter ongoing battles. Their arrival doesn't necessarily mean immediate intervention. The orcs might pause to watch, at least initially. This isn't because they're being cautious or strategic. It's because they want to see how the fight develops. They want to evaluate the combatants and enjoy the spectacle. This delay, this moment of observation, creates a unique dynamic where the original combatants might temporarily become performers in an orc arena, though they may not realize it until it's too late. The orc tendency to treat warfare as entertainment also influences their decision-making in complex tactical situations. When faced with the scenario of two enemies fighting each other, an orc must grapple with competing impulses. There's the desire to join the fight because fighting is what orcs do. But there's also the recognition that the current fight is already entertaining, and joining it might spoil the fun. Additionally, there's always the practical consideration of loot. Dead combatants might have valuable salvage, especially if those combatants are advanced war machines like Dreadnoughts. These competing motivations create a tension that can only be resolved through the orc decision-making process, which typically involves a lot of shouting and occasionally some violence among the orcs themselves. Understanding orc psychology also requires recognizing their social structure and how it influences collective behavior. Orc society operates on a simple principle: might makes right. The biggest, strongest orc is in charge, and he maintains that position by being able to defeat any challenger. This creates a hierarchy that is constantly in flux, but always clearly defined. When a mob of orcs encounters a situation like two dreadnoughts fighting, the response will be heavily influenced by the war boss or nob in charge. His preferences, his assessment of the situation, and his personal desire for either entertainment or loot will shape what the entire mob does. However, orc social structure isn't purely authoritarian. While the war boss has the final say, orcs are perfectly capable of expressing dissent, usually loudly and sometimes violently. A mob of orcs watching. Two dreadnoughts fight might contain individuals with different opinions about what to do. Some might want to jump in immediately. Others might want to wait and see who wins before looting the survivor. Still others might be perfectly content to watch and make crude commentary. These differing viewpoints create a chaotic energy that characterizes orc decision-making. The war boss doesn't need to convince his followers with logic or rhetoric. He just needs to be big enough and mean enough that they follow his lead, even if they're grumbling about it. The final aspect of orc psychology relevant to our scenario is their relationship with technology and machinery. Orcs have a deep fascination with mechanical things, especially big, loud, destructive mechanical things. Their mech boys build crude but surprisingly effective war machines, from simple weapons to massive walkers and vehicles. When orcs see advanced technology like Space Marine dreadnoughts, they experience a mixture of admiration, envy, and acquisitive desire. They recognize the destructive potential of such machines, and they want to either possess them or at least witness their capabilities firsthand. This technological fascination adds another layer to their response when encountering fighting dreadnoughts. It's not just two warriors fighting, it's two impressive pieces of military hardware demonstrating their capabilities in real time. What is a dreadnought? To fully appreciate what the orcs are witnessing, we need to understand the terrible majesty of the dreadnought. These walking sarcophagi represent one of the most tragic yet powerful weapons in the Space Marine arsenal, and their chaos-corrupted counterparts are equally formidable, though far more horrifying. A dreadnought is not simply a vehicle or a robot. It is a living tomb, a union of dying flesh and immortal machine, a warrior who has transcended death itself to continue fighting for his cause. Understanding what dreadnoughts are and what they represent provides crucial context for the spectacle the Orks are witnessing. A Space Marine dreadnought begins its existence as a tragedy, when a Space Marine suffers wounds so catastrophic that even the advanced medical technology of the Imperium cannot save him, but his body still clings to life and his mind remains intact. The chapter faces a choice. They can allow the warrior to die, honoring his sacrifice and adding his name to the rolls of the honored dead, or they can grant him what is considered the highest honor: internment within a dreadnought. This process involves removing what remains of the warrior's body, little more than a torso, with vital organs still functioning, and sealing it within an armored sarcophagus filled with amniotic fluid. This sarcophagus is then integrated into a massive combat walker, creating a cybernetic fusion of man and machine. The warrior inside the dreadnought experiences existence in a way that is fundamentally altered from his previous life. He no longer has limbs in the traditional sense. Instead, the weapons and manipulators of the dreadnought become his arms. He doesn't see through eyes, but through optical sensors and targeting systems. Every movement of the massive walker is translated directly to his nervous system, allowing him to control it with the same instinctive precision he once used to control his own body. But this comes at a terrible cost. The sensory deprivation, the isolation within the sarcophagus, and the constant awareness of his transformed state places immense strain on the warrior's mind. To preserve their sanity, dreadnoughts are kept in stasis between battles, awakened only when the chapter needs their experience and firepower. For a Space Marine, becoming a dreadnought is considered an honor, a chance to continue serving the Emperor long after death should have claimed them. The chapter reveres its dreadnoughts as venerable ancients, living libraries of tactical knowledge and combat experience. Some dreadnoughts have fought for centuries, even millennia, their memories stretching back to the founding of their chapter, or even earlier. They remember battles long forgotten by the wider Imperium. They remember tactics that have been lost to time. They remember brothers whose names have faded from all records except the dreadnought's own failing organic memory. This makes them invaluable, not just as warriors, but as counselors and historians. The physical capabilities of a dreadnought are formidable. Standing approximately 3 times the height of a man, they tower over standard infantry, while remaining smaller than true titans. Their armor is thick ceramite and adamantium, capable of withstanding weapons fire that would shred conventional vehicles. Their weapons vary, but typically include some combination of heavy-ranged weaponry, like assault cannons, lascannons, or missile launchers, paired with powerful close combat weapons, such as power fists or dreadnought close combat weapons. A single dreadnought can lay waste to entire squads of enemy infantry, destroy vehicles, and hold critical positions through sheer firepower and resilience. But the true power of a dreadnought lies not just in its weapons and armor, but in the warrior inside. Space Marines are already superhuman warriors, selected from humanity's finest, and transformed into living weapons through genetic modification and intense training. When that warrior's centuries of experience are combined with the durability and firepower of a dreadnought chassis, the result is a nearly unstoppable force on the battlefield. Dreadnoughts fight with the tactical acumen of veteran officers and the ferocity of warriors who have nothing left to lose. They are already dead in every meaningful sense, preserved only to serve, and this gives them a fearlessness that can be terrifying to witness. Now let us turn to the darker reflection of this technology, the Chaos Hellbrute. When the traitor legions turned against the Emperor during the Horus Heresy 10,000 years ago, they brought their dreadnoughts with them into damnation. Over the millennia since, These machines and their pilots have been corrupted by the malevolent energies of the warp. The result is the Hellbrute, a twisted mockery of the Space Marine Dreadnought that combines advanced technology with demonic corruption. Where internment in a Dreadnought is considered an honor by loyalist Space Marines, becoming a Hellbrute is viewed by Chaos Space Marines as a fate worse than death. The process is similar in its mechanics, but vastly different in its outcome. The warrior is still sealed within a sarcophagus, still wired into a combat walker. But Chaos technology and the warping influence of the Imperium corrupt both man and machine. The sarcophagus itself becomes a thing of demonic flesh metal, a pseudo-parasitic entity that melds with the warrior inside. The Hellbrute's armor sprouts spikes, mutations, and faces locked in eternal screams. The weapons bristle with malevolent energy. The pilot of a Hellbrute experiences existence as an unending nightmare. Unlike loyalist dreadnoughts who are granted the mercy of stasis between battles, Hellbrutes are often left conscious, chained like beasts in the bellies of chaos warships. The isolation, the sensory chaos, the constant whispers of demons, and the pain of their corrupted form drive them progressively insane. This madness makes them unpredictable in battle, as likely to fly into a berserker rage and attack anything nearby as to follow orders. Some Hellbrutes retain enough of their former selves to direct this rage at their enemies. Others have descended so far into madness that they are little more than engines of indiscriminate destruction. Despite, or perhaps because of their insanity, Hellbrutes are terrifyingly effective in combat. The warp corruption that plagues them also grants terrible gifts. Their armor might regenerate damage through demonic power. Their weapons might be imbued with chaos energies that corrupt what they strike. The pilot's madness translates into a fighting style that is utterly without mercy or hesitation, a frenzied assault that overwhelms through sheer aggression. Where a loyalist dreadnought fights with tactical precision, a Hellbrute fights with the fury of a tormented soul seeking release through destruction. The visual distinction between a loyalist dreadnought and a chaos Hellbrute is immediately apparent. The dreadnought bears the proud heraldry of its chapter, its armor pristine despite the scars of battle, its movements precise and controlled. The Hellbrute is a corruption of this form, covered in blasphemous symbols, its armor warped and twisted, its movements jerky and erratic as the madness within wars with the corrupted machine spirit. To witness them fight is to see order clash with chaos, duty war with insanity, the Imperium's determination to preserve its heroes set against the warp's power to corrupt all it touches. When these two types of dreadnought meet in battle, the conflict carries layers of meaning beyond simple warfare. Often, the Hellbrute was once a loyalist dreadnought, corrupted when its chapter turned traitor or captured and perverted by chaos forces. The loyalist dreadnought might be fighting what was once a brother, a friend, a hero of the same chapter before the split. The Hellbrute might retain enough memory to recognize its opponent, adding personal hatred to its mad fury. These are battles of brothers turned enemies, of loyalty versus betrayal, fought between warriors who should have died millennia ago but persist in their torment. The combat capabilities of both types of dreadnought are roughly equivalent, though their fighting styles differ significantly. A loyalist dreadnought leverages its experience and tactical knowledge, choosing targets carefully and fighting with disciplined aggression. A Hellbrute relies on overwhelming violence and unpredictability, throwing itself into combat with reckless abandon. Both can destroy enemy armor, annihilate infantry, and hold critical terrain through sheer durability. When they fight each other, the result is a prolonged slugging match where superior armor meets superior firepower, where two walking tanks attempt to tear each other apart through sustained violence. The weapons they carry into this confrontation vary, but certain loadouts are common. Assault cannons, capable of throwing out hundreds of rounds per minute, tear at armor with relentless firepower. Lascannons slice through even the thickest plating with focused energy beams. Missile launchers add explosive power to the mix. In close combat, Power fists and dreadnought close combat weapons can crush armor and rend metal with each devastating blow. Both types of dreadnought typically pair ranged and melee weapons, allowing them to engage at any distance. A fight between them involves volleys of gunfire, interspersed with charges and grappling, a brutal dance of destruction that can last for extended periods as their durable armor soaks up tremendous punishment. From a strategic perspective, dreadnoughts are force multipliers. A single dreadnought supporting an infantry advance can turn the tide of an entire engagement. They anchor defensive lines, spearhead assaults, and serve as mobile fire platforms. Commanders deploy them to critical points on the battlefield, where their presence will have maximum impact. This means that when two dreadnoughts fight, they're often fighting in locations of strategic importance, places where their armies need them to prevail. The outcome of their personal duel can determine the fate of the larger battle, making their conflict all the more desperate and intense. The sounds and sights of a dreadnought battle are spectacular, even by the standards of the 41st Millennium. The roar of weapons fire, the crash of metal on metal, the ground shaking with each thunderous step, these create a sensory experience that dominates the battlefield. Nearby combatants, whether human, space marine, or otherwise, often pause in their own fighting to watch these titans clash. The spectacle is simply too overwhelming to ignore. And if regular humans and even space marines find themselves drawn to watch dreadnoughts fight, imagine how orcs, who live for combat and appreciate nothing more than a good scrap, would react to encountering such a battle. The discovery. The moment when orcs first encounter two dreadnoughts fighting is charged with possibility. The specific circumstances of this discovery can vary wildly depending on the tactical situation, the terrain, and the disposition of the various forces involved. But certain patterns emerge across these scenarios, patterns rooted in orc behavior and the realities of warfare in the 41st Millennium. Let us explore how these encounters typically unfold, from the first awareness that something interesting is happening to the moment when the orcs must decide how to respond. Picture a battlefield scarred by weeks or months of fighting. Perhaps it's an imperial world under attack by chaos forces, or a dead world where loyalist space marines are hunting traitors who once called them brothers. The fighting has been fierce, creating a landscape of craters, ruined fortifications, and burning wreckage. In this devastated environment, a loyalist dreadnought has engaged a chaos hellbrute, both of them pursuing objectives critical to their respective forces. The battle between these war machines has drawn them away from the main fighting into a sector of the battlefield that has become temporarily quiet after the latest assault waves have passed through. This is when the orcs arrive. They might be a scouting party pushed forward by a war boss to find new enemies to fight. They might be looters searching the battlefield for salvage and weapons. They might simply be a mob of boys who got separated from their main force and are looking for something interesting to do. The specific reason for their presence matters less than what happens when they crest a ridge or round a corner, and suddenly find themselves with a clear view of two massive war machines attempting to destroy each other. The first orc to spot the fighting dreadnoughts typically reacts with immediate excitement. He might let out a yell, a characteristic orc exclamation that combines surprise, joy, and aggressive enthusiasm. This cry alerts the other orcs in his mob, and suddenly dozens or even hundreds of greenskin heads are turning to see what has caused such excitement. The orcs push forward, jostling each other for a better view, their previous objectives immediately forgotten in the face of this spectacular discovery. What they see is likely the most impressive fight most of them have witnessed in some time. The two dreadnoughts are locked in brutal combat, trading fire and blows with the accumulated skill of centuries. Weapons flash and roar. Armor sparks where shots connect. The very ground trembles with the impact of their movements. For orcs, who measure everything against the standard of a good scrap, this is entertainment of the highest order. It's two of the biggest, hardest, shootiest things they've seen recently, and they're trying to kill each other with beautiful, violent enthusiasm. The initial Ork response is almost always to stop and watch. This isn't a tactical decision. It's pure instinct. When Orks see something this impressive, their first impulse is to appreciate the spectacle. They spread out to get better viewing angles, unconsciously forming a rough semicircle or arc around the combatants. The Orks at the front squat or sit, allowing those behind them to see over their heads. Some Orks might climb onto rubble piles or the wrecks of vehicles to get elevated positions with clearer sightlines. In their own crude way, they're arranging themselves like an audience at an arena, preparing to watch the show. As more Orks arrive, drawn by the noise of the fighting and the excited yelling of their fellows, the mob grows. Word spreads through whatever Ork forces are in the area that something interesting is happening. "There's two big metal Yumis crumping each other over here," travels from mob to mob, and Orks begin converging on the location. The WAG energy starts to build as the greenskins gather, feeding off each other's excitement. This growing crowd transforms the isolated Dreadnought battle into something more, a performance being staged before an increasingly large and vocal audience. The Orks don't remain silent spectators. As soon as they recover from their initial surprise, they begin to provide commentary on the action. In their crude language, they shout observations and opinions about the fighting. "That's a good un," yells one Ork as a particularly devastating blow connects. "He's gonna feel that in the morning," shouts another. The commentary isn't sophisticated, but it's enthusiastic and constant. The Orks are engaging with the fight, analyzing it in their own simple way, appreciating the finer points of the violence unfolding before them. Betting starts almost immediately. Orks love gambling, especially on fights, and this scenario is too perfect to pass up. Orks begin wagering teeth, their currency, weapons, or favors on which combatant will win. The odds shift constantly as the fight progresses, with some Orks loudly proclaiming that the loyalist Dreadnought has the advantage, while others insist the Hellbrute's mad fury will carry the day. Arguments break out over the bets, occasionally escalating into brief scuffles among the Orks themselves, before they remember that there's a better fight to watch and return their attention to the Dreadnoughts. The Orks assign crude nicknames to the combatants based on visual characteristics or fighting style. The loyalist Dreadnought might become the blue one with the big shooter, or the pointy git with the big fist, the missile. Hellbrute might be called the spiky nasty one, or the screamy metal git. These nicknames spread through the crowd, giving the Orks a way to discuss the combatants and place their bets. The names show a surprising level of observation, with Orks noticing details about the Dreadnought's appearance, weapons, and tactics, even if they don't understand the deeper significance of these elements. As the crowd of Ork spectators grows larger and more excited, they inadvertently create a problem for the actual combatants. The Dreadnoughts, focused on destroying each other, may not immediately notice the gathering greenskin mob, but the Orks are not subtle. They're loud, they're moving around constantly, and they're generating significant WAG energy. Eventually, even the most battle-focused Dreadnought pilot will register the fact that hundreds of Orks have formed an impromptu arena around the fight. This realization creates a complex tactical situation for both combatants. For the loyalist Dreadnought, the arrival of Orks represents an additional threat, but also a potential opportunity. If the Hellbrute can be goaded into attacking the Orks, it might give the loyalist a chance to disengage or gain an advantage. However, the presence of so many greenskins also means that even if the Hellbrute is defeated, the Dreadnought will then face a fresh enemy in a potentially weakened state. The pilot must make rapid calculations about whether to continue the current fight, attempt to disengage, or somehow use the Orks to his advantage. The Hellbrute's response to the Ork presence is likely more erratic. Its mad pilot might not even notice the greenskins, so focused is he on destroying the loyalist Dreadnought. Or the Hellbrute might suddenly turn on the Orks, seeing them as easier targets, or simply reacting to the nearest concentration of enemies. The unpredictability of a chaos-corrupted machine makes it impossible to know how it will respond to this changed tactical situation. This unpredictability becomes part of the entertainment for the Orks, who find the Hellbrute's erratic behavior fascinating. From their position as observers, the Orks begin to form opinions about how the fight is progressing and what might happen next. Some Orks start calling out advice to the combatants, not expecting to be heard or obeyed, but unable to resist commenting on the tactical situation. "Oi! Shoot him in the legs!" yells one Ork. "Crump him from behind!" shouts another. The advice is almost universally terrible from a tactical standpoint, but it reflects the Ork engagement with the spectacle. They're invested in the outcome now, not because they care about either combatant particularly, but because they want to see a satisfying conclusion to this excellent scrap. Meanwhile, the Nob or war boss who commands this mob of Orks faces a decision. The presence of the fighting Dreadnoughts creates both opportunity and risk. On one hand, letting the two enemies fight until one or both are severely damaged or destroyed represents a chance for easy salvage and loot. On the other hand, Orks didn't come here just to watch. They came to fight. The longer the mob sits idle, the more restless they become. The war boss must balance the entertainment value of the spectacle against the risk that his boys will get bored or frustrated and do something unpredictable. The decision is complicated by Ork psychology and social dynamics. Different Orks in the mob will have different opinions about what should happen next. Some want to keep watching. Others are eager to join the fight. Still others are already thinking about the loot they might claim from the wreckage. The war boss's authority is absolute, but only as long as he demonstrates that he's the biggest and meanest Ork around. If he makes a decision that enough of his boys disagree with, he might face challenges to his leadership. These challenges would result in violence, which the Orks don't really mind, but which would be a distraction from the current situation. As the standoff continues, with the Dreadnoughts fighting and the Orks watching, tension builds. The situation is inherently unstable. At any moment, one of several things might happen. The Dreadnought fight might conclude with one combatant victorious. The Dreadnoughts might notice the Orks and adjust their tactics. The Orks might decide to intervene, or external factors like the arrival of more combatants from any faction might change everything. This pregnant pause, this moment of anticipation, is itself part of the entertainment for the Orks. They're waiting to see what happens, poised on the edge of either continued observation or active participation. Ork behavior during the fight. While the two Dreadnoughts continue their titanic struggle, the Ork mob that has gathered to watch displays behaviors that reveal much about greenskin culture and psychology. The Orks are not passive spectators. They engage with the spectacle in ways that turn the battlefield into something resembling an arena, complete with audience participation, commentary, and the constant possibility that the audience might decide to become participants. Understanding how Orks behave during this phase illuminates both their nature and the unique dynamics of this scenario. The first and most obvious aspect of Ork behavior is the noise. Orks are not quiet at the best of times, and when they're excited about something, their volume increases exponentially. The crowd generates a constant roar of sound, a mixture of cheering, jeering, laughing, arguing, and making random aggressive noises. When one of the Dreadnoughts lands a particularly impressive hit, the Ork response is immediate and loud. They cheer, they wave their weapons in the air, they shove each other in excitement. The noise is so intense that it can actually interfere with Vox communications in the area, creating a strange bubble of interference around the fight. Individual Orks within the crowd constantly shout commentary on the action. These running commentaries reflect Ork tactical thinking, such as it is, and their understanding of combat. "That's a good shot," yells one Ork as a Lascannon blast tears into armor. "Shoulda aimed for the legs," critiques another. "He's getting him now," predicts a third, as one Dreadnought gains a momentary advantage. The commentary isn't sophisticated, but it demonstrates that the orcs are actually paying attention and analyzing what they see. They're not just watching mindless violence, they're evaluating the fighters' techniques and effectiveness. The betting that started when the orcs first arrived intensifies as the fight continues. Odds shift with every exchange, with some orcs trying to hedge their bets by switching sides or making additional wagers. Arguments about the bets are constant, with orcs loudly debating the relative merits of each combatant. "The spiky one's gonna win, he's madder," insists one orc. "Nah, the blue one's shootier," counters another. These arguments occasionally escalate into brief fights among the orcs themselves, quick scuffles that break out and resolve themselves within moments before the combatants return to watching the main event. Some orcs start making or selling crude concessions. A particularly enterprising Gretchen might appear with squigs to eat or fungus beer to drink, hawking his wares to the crowd. Other orcs might grab trophies or scrap from nearby wreckage and start trading them, using the gathering as an impromptu market. This commercial activity might seem out of place on a battlefield, but it reflects a fundamental truth about orcs. They're always working multiple angles. Even while watching a fight, they're thinking about personal gain and social advancement. The crowd's reaction to the fighting becomes more sophisticated as they watch. The orcs begin to recognize patterns in the combatants' tactics. They notice that the loyalist Dreadnought favors certain weapon combinations or movement patterns. They observe that the Hellbrute's attacks are more erratic, but sometimes more effective because of their unpredictability. This pattern recognition doesn't make the orcs strategic geniuses, but it does show that they're learning from what they observe. They're adding to their collective knowledge of how to fight similar opponents in the future. As the fight drags on, some orcs start to get restless. This is inevitable with greenskins, whose attention spans are limited and whose desire for action is nearly infinite. These restless orcs start to grumble and complain. "When's someone gonna die?" demands one. "This is taking too long," whines another. The patient orcs around them tell them to shut up and watch, sometimes reinforcing this suggestion with violence. This internal tension within the orc mob is important. It's building toward a point where something will have to give. Either the Dreadnought fight will reach a conclusion, or the orcs will stop being spectators. Interestingly, some orcs start to pick favorites among the combatants. This emotional investment in one Dreadnought or the other is somewhat arbitrary, based on superficial characteristics or fighting style. But it becomes real to the orcs who develop it. They cheer louder when their chosen combatant lands a hit, groan when it takes damage, and celebrate if it gains an advantage. This partisanship adds another layer to the orc betting pools and creates additional grounds for arguments among the greenskins. The fact that both combatants are technically enemies of the orcs is irrelevant. What matters is the quality of the fight and the entertainment it provides. The physical arrangement of the orc crowd evolves as the fight progresses. Orcs constantly jockey for better positions, pushing and shoving to get closer or find angles with clearer views. Some orcs climb onto the shoulders of others, creating impromptu viewing platforms. Others stand on vehicles or structures. The result is a three-dimensional arrangement of greenskins, a tiered amphitheater of sorts that forms organically around the battle. This positioning isn't coordinated or planned. It's the result of hundreds of individual orcs, each trying to optimize their viewing experience. Music and rhythmic chanting sometimes emerge from the crowd. Orcs have a crude but enthusiastic approach to music, and large gatherings of greenskins often generate spontaneous songs or chants. During a Dreadnought fight, these might take the form of rhythmic shouts timed to the impacts of weapons or the stomping of heavy feet. "Wah! Wah! Wah!" they might chant, or "Crump im! Crump im!" This creates an atmosphere not unlike a sporting event, with the crowd providing a soundtrack to the violence. The mech boys in the crowd pay particularly close attention to the technical aspects of the Dreadnoughts. These orcs, who possess an innate understanding of technology, study the walking war machines with professional interest. They note the weapon systems, the armor configuration, the movement mechanisms. They're already thinking about how they might replicate certain features in their own constructions, or how they might salvage useful components if the opportunity arises. Some mech boys even sketch crude diagrams in the dirt or on scraps of metal, trying to capture design elements they find interesting. The crowd starts to develop a narrative around the fight. Orks love stories, especially stories about fighting, and they begin constructing a tale about these two combatants. They invent backgrounds for the fighters, imagining epic histories and famous battles. "Dat blue one, he fought Gazkul once," claims one orc, making up stories wholesale. "The spiky one ate a whole planet," counters another, equally inventive. These stories have no basis in reality, but they add to the entertainment value and give the orcs something to argue about during lulls in the action. Some orcs start imitating the combatants, acting out moves they see or creating mock battles with their fellows. These playfights spread through parts of the crowd as orcs use the Dreadnought battle as inspiration for their own entertainment. The smaller conflicts don't detract from watching the main event. Rather, they exist in parallel, with orcs switching between watching and participating in smaller scraps. This behavior reinforces how central combat is to orc identity. They can't just watch fighting, they have to do it themselves, even if only in play. The atmosphere around the fight becomes increasingly charged with WH40K energy. The gathered orcs, their excitement building, generate a psychic field that grows stronger and more focused. This energy doesn't directly affect the Dreadnoughts, as they're not orcs and aren't connected to the Gestalt psychic phenomenon, but it affects the orcs themselves, making them stronger, faster, and more aggressive. It also makes them more likely to act impulsively, to charge into battle without thinking, to take risks they might otherwise avoid. The building WH40K energy is like a pressure cooker, constantly increasing and looking for release. The nob or war boss leading this mob remains aware of the building tension. He's enjoying the show as much as any of his boys, but he's also thinking about what happens next. He reads the mood of the crowd, sensing when they're approaching the point where watching won't be enough anymore. He considers his options: let the fight play out naturally, intervene now while both combatants are still engaged with each other, or wait for one to win and then attack the victor. Each option has advantages and risks, and his decision will shape what happens in the next phase of this scenario. Throughout all of this, the actual Dreadnought combat continues. The two war machines remain focused on destroying each other, though they're certainly aware of the orc presence by now. The question isn't whether the orcs are there, but what they'll do next. For the warriors entombed within the Dreadnoughts, this represents an additional layer of tactical complexity in an already desperate situation. They must continue fighting their primary enemy while preparing for the possibility that hundreds of orcs might suddenly join the battle. Deciding whether to intervene. The question of whether and when the orcs intervene in the Dreadnought fight is central to understanding this scenario. This decision point reveals the complexity of orc behavior and the factors that influence their actions. While it might seem that the answer is obvious, that orcs would immediately join any fight they encounter, the reality is more nuanced. The decision-making process, such as it is among greenskins, involves competing priorities and perspectives that must be reconciled before the mob acts as a whole. The primary tension in this decision is between the value of entertainment and the desire for action. The Dreadnought fight is spectacular, easily the most impressive thing most of these orcs have seen in recent memory. As long as it continues, it provides entertainment that the orcs genuinely enjoy. But orcs didn't travel to a war zone to be spectators. Their fundamental nature demands participation in violence, not mere observation of it. The longer they watch without fighting, the more this tension builds. Eventually, one pressure or the other will win out, and the mob will act accordingly. Different factions within the orc mob advocate for different approaches. The most aggressive orcs, particularly those from clans like the Goths who value close combat above all, want to charge in immediately. They see two strong opponents, and they want to test themselves against such worthy foes. These orcs argue loudly that they should join the fight now, while both combatants are occupied with each other and might be vulnerable to a sudden assault from a new direction. Their position is straightforward. Fighting is good, more fighting is better, and standing around watching when you could be crumping is a waste of time. Other orcs, particularly the more pragmatic ones, and those aligned with the Death Skulls clan who specialize in looting, advocate for patience. Their argument is equally simple. The longer the two dreadnoughts fight, the more damage they do to each other. If the orcs wait for one or both combatants to fall, they can loot the wreckage without having to fight for it, or at least they can fight a severely weakened opponent. These orcs point out that dreadnoughts are tough and dangerous. Letting them weaken each other before intervening just makes practical sense. Besides, the entertainment value of watching is not negligible. A third faction, the opportunistic orcs, suggest a middle path. Wait until one dreadnought is clearly winning, then attack the victor while it's damaged, but before it can finish off its opponent. This way, the orcs get the entertainment of watching most of the fight, but they also get to participate in the final outcome and claim at least some of the glory and loot. This position appeals to orcs who want both action and smart tactics, insofar as orcs understand smart tactics. The debate among the orcs is conducted in their characteristic manner, loud, aggressive, and occasionally violent. Orcs don't have formal meetings or voting procedures. Instead, they argue their positions by shouting at each other, sometimes literally shoving or hitting those who disagree with them. The warboss or nob in charge listens to these arguments, though listens might be too generous a term. He hears the noise, gauges the mood of the mob, and thinks about what he personally wants to do. His decision will be final, not because everyone agrees with it, but because he's big enough to enforce it. Several practical considerations influence the decision. The size of the orc mob matters. A small group might be reluctant to attack two dreadnoughts, while a large mob might feel confident in overwhelming them through sheer numbers. The weapons available to the orcs are relevant. Mobs with heavy weapons like rockets or custom mega blasters have better chances against armored targets than those armed only with choppers and sluggers. The tactical situation matters too. If the orcs have objectives elsewhere or are expecting enemy reinforcements, they might need to make a quick decision rather than watching indefinitely. The condition of the dreadnoughts themselves becomes increasingly important as the fight progresses. If one combatant is clearly winning, the calculus changes. A heavily damaged dreadnought is easier prey, but also less impressive as a trophy. An intact but victorious dreadnought represents both a greater threat and a more valuable prize. The orcs watch for signs of critical damage, for system failures, for moments of weakness that might indicate an opportune time to intervene. Their understanding of dreadnought durability might be crude, but they recognize when something big and armored is starting to fail. The entertainment value of the fight itself influences how long the orcs are willing to wait. If the combat is spectacular, with impressive weapons fire and devastating melee exchanges, the orcs are more inclined to keep watching. Their enjoyment of the spectacle buys time, keeping the aggressive impulse in check. But if the fight becomes repetitive or boring, if it turns into a stalemate where neither side can gain an advantage, the orcs' patience wears thin quickly. They came for a good scrap, and if the current scrap isn't delivering, they're more likely to intervene to make things interesting. The personalities involved play a significant role. The warboss's personal preferences matter enormously. If he's the type who values entertainment and spectacle, he might be content to watch longer. If he's more focused on proving his strength or acquiring loot, he might order an attack sooner. Similarly, the attitudes of key nobs in the mob influence the decision. If the biggest and meanest orcs besides the warboss are all eager to fight, that creates pressure to act. If they're enjoying the show, that support makes it easier for the warboss to justify continued observation. There's also a social dynamic at play regarding status and reputation. For a warboss, allowing his boys to watch a fight without participating might be seen as weakness or indecision by some. But intervening too early, before the entertainment value has been fully extracted, might disappoint others. The war boss must balance these competing perceptions to maintain his authority. He needs to appear decisive and strong, while also demonstrating the wisdom to know when to act. This is a delicate balance for orcs, who value straightforward strength, but also respect cunning when it delivers results. The possibility of external factors also enters into orc deliberations, though perhaps not as consciously as with more strategic-minded races. If other forces are likely to arrive soon, that might prompt quicker action. If the orcs are supposed to be somewhere else or doing something else, that creates time pressure. If the WAG energy building in the mob reaches a critical level, it might become impossible to keep the boys from charging regardless of what the leadership wants. These external factors can force a decision, even when the orcs might prefer to keep watching. Interestingly, the orcs might also be influenced by what they think will make the best story afterward. Orcs love recounting tales of fights they've been in or witnessed, and they're already thinking about how they'll describe this encounter to their fellows. A story where they watched the whole fight and then looted the wreckage is good, but a story where they charged in and turned a two-way battle into a three-way free-for-all is potentially better. The narrative value of different choices influences orc decision-making in ways that other races might find baffling. As the deliberation continues, whether it lasts for minutes or mere seconds, the orcs remain poised on the edge of action. The WAG energy continues to build. The noise level increases. The aggressive shoving and minor scuffles within the mob become more frequent. There's a palpable sense that something is about to happen, that the status quo cannot hold much longer. The question isn't whether the orcs will act, but when and how. The final trigger for action can come from multiple sources. The warboss might simply decide that he's seen enough and issue the order to attack. One of the Dreadnoughts might do something particularly impressive or particularly foolish that changes the tactical equation. An impatient orc might break ranks and charge on his own, forcing the rest of the mob to follow or lose face. The WAG energy might reach a peak that makes restraint impossible, or external circumstances might force an immediate decision. Regardless of the specific trigger, there comes a moment when observation ends and participation begins. If they join the fight, when the orcs finally decide to intervene in the Dreadnought battle, the transition from spectators to participants happens with characteristic greenskin speed and enthusiasm. One moment they're watching and commenting. The next moment, they're charging forward with weapons raised and throats full of war cries. What follows is a perfect example of how orcs approach warfare: direct, violent, opportunistic, and absolutely chaotic. The three-way battle that erupts combines the tactical sophistication of Space Marine doctrine, the mad fury of chaos corruption, and the overwhelming enthusiasm of a WAG into a maelstrom of violence. The charge itself is a sight to behold. Hundreds of orcs surging forward as a green tide, weapons waving, mouths open in bellowing cries of WAG! The mob doesn't maintain any particular formation. Some orcs are faster than others, either due to their size or their eagerness. The resulting assault is ragged but unstoppable. A wave of muscle and violence that crashes toward the still fighting Dreadnoughts. The noise is incredible, drowning out even the sounds of Dreadnought weapons fire. The WAG energy that has been building throughout the observation period is finally released, making the orcs stronger, faster, and more dangerous than they would be individually. The orcs' target selection reveals their priorities and tactics. Some orcs charge toward the loyalist Dreadnought, either because they think it looks like a better fight, or simply because it's closer. Others head for the Hellbrute, attracted by its spiky, intimidating appearance, or by the mad fury of its fighting style. Still others don't seem to have a specific target, content to charge toward the battle and crump whatever they reach first. This lack of coordination might seem like a weakness, but it actually creates problems for the Dreadnoughts, who suddenly face attacks from multiple angles with no clear pattern to predict. The initial impact of the orc charge tests both Dreadnoughts' tactical flexibility. For the loyalist Dreadnought, the sudden assault by hundreds of greenskins represents a catastrophic shift in the tactical situation. The pilot must instantly reassess priorities. Does he continue focusing on the Hellbrute, treating the Orks as a secondary threat? Does he switch targets entirely, recognizing that weight of numbers makes the Orks more immediately dangerous? Does he attempt to use the terrain or the Hellbrute's position to limit his exposure to the Ork attack? These decisions must be made in seconds, with incomplete information, while under fire from both previous and new enemies. The Hellbrute's response to the Ork charge is likely more erratic, but potentially more effective in the short term. The madness that afflicts its pilot makes it unpredictable, which can be an advantage when facing multiple opponents. The Hellbrute might ignore the Orks entirely, so fixated on the Loyalist that nothing else registers as a threat. Or it might suddenly wheel around and unleash its full fury on the charging greenskins, seeing them as easier targets than the well-armored Dreadnought. Or it might split its attacks between both enemies, lashing out in all directions with no coherent strategy but terrifying effectiveness. This unpredictability makes it difficult for either the Loyalist or the Orks to plan around what the Hellbrute will do next. The Orks employ several tactics in their assault, insofar as they can be said to employ tactics at all. Those armed with heavy weapons, rockets and custom mega blasters primarily, hang back slightly and begin firing at the Dreadnoughts. The quality of their shooting is questionable. Orks are notoriously poor marksmen, but the volume of fire compensates for lack of accuracy. When you throw enough explosive projectiles at a target, some of them will connect, and even Dreadnought armor has its limits. The heavy weapon Orks are often accompanied by Gretchen helpers who reload weapons, carry ammunition, and occasionally get used as impromptu shields. The bulk of the Ork assault consists of boys armed for close combat, and they employ the classic greenskin tactic of overwhelming the enemy through sheer numbers. They swarm toward the Dreadnoughts, dozens of Orks attacking each war machine. Most of their weapons, choppers and sluggers, are inadequate against Dreadnought armor. A single Ork with a chopper isn't going to hurt a Dreadnought significantly, but 50 Orks with choppers, all hacking away at joints, weak points, and already damaged sections of armor, can absolutely cause problems. The Orks look for vulnerabilities, not because they're being tactically sophisticated, but because they instinctively understand that you attack weak points when you can't hurt something directly. Some Orks attempt to climb onto the Dreadnoughts, treating them like the Ork gargants and stompers they're familiar with. These greenskins scramble up the walking war machines, looking for hatches, vents, or other access points they can exploit. They plant melter bombs or stick bombs in joints and seams. They try to jam weapons with their own bodies or equipment. They attack sensors and targeting systems. Some of these attempts are successful. Others result in the Ork falling off or being crushed. But the sheer audacity of trying to physically climb onto a Dreadnought in the middle of combat is very characteristic of greenskin behavior. The Dreadnought's responses to this multi-front assault demonstrate their combat capabilities and limitations. A Dreadnought's weapons are optimized for fighting vehicles and heavily armored infantry, not for engaging dozens of lighter targets simultaneously. An assault cannon, or lascannon, is devastating against a single target, but less efficient when facing a mob. The Dreadnoughts must adjust their tactics, sweeping weapons fire across groups of Orks rather than focusing on single targets. In close combat, Dreadnought power fists and close combat weapons can kill multiple Orks per swing, but there are always more greenskins pressing forward to take the place of the fallen. The three-way nature of the battle creates interesting dynamics. The Dreadnoughts must now divide their attention between each other and the Orks. This typically means one of several scenarios develops. In the first scenario, the Dreadnoughts temporarily set aside their mutual conflict to deal with the Ork threat, recognizing that they need to survive the immediate assault before they can continue their duel. This creates a bizarre situation where enemies who were trying to kill each other seconds ago are now fighting back-to-back against a common foe, though their cooperation is uneasy and temporary at best. In a second scenario, one Dreadnought continues to focus on its original enemy while trying to avoid or minimize damage from the Orks. This usually means the focused Dreadnought attempts to Keep the other dreadnought between itself and the bulk of the Ork assault, using its enemy as a shield while still trying to destroy it. This is tactically sound, but requires precise positioning and creates opportunities for both the other dreadnought and the Orks to exploit. In a third scenario, both dreadnoughts switch focus to the Orks, but from opposite sides of the battlefield, creating a situation where the greenskin mob is caught between two sources of withering fire. This is often the worst outcome for the Orks, but the best for the dreadnoughts, as it allows both war machines to use their superior firepower and armor effectively, while putting the softer Ork targets in a devastating crossfire. The casualties on all sides mount quickly. Orks die in droves, torn apart by dreadnought weapons or crushed under massive feet. But the Orks keep coming, driven by their nature and the wag energy flowing through them. Each fallen Ork is immediately replaced by two more, the mob pressing forward with relentless aggression. The dreadnoughts take damage from the cumulative effect of numerous small attacks. Armor becomes scored and dented. Systems begin to fail. Warning lights flash in the pilots' displays as damage accumulates beyond what their war machines can easily sustain. The looting impulse that helped drive the Orks' decision to intervene manifests even during the battle. Some Orks, particularly those from the Deathskulls clan, can't resist grabbing pieces of wreckage or interesting components even while the fight rages around them. They stuff bits of broken dreadnought armor into pouches, drag weapon parts toward the edges of the battlefield, or try to jury-rig captured equipment into working order. This behavior seems suicidal, and often is, but it also demonstrates the Ork inability to focus on just one thing when there's loot to be had. The mech boys are particularly guilty of this, seeing the combat as an opportunity to acquire rare technology rather than a life-or-death struggle. The terrain becomes increasingly treacherous as the battle continues. The ground is churned up by heavy feet and explosions. Craters open up, wreckage piles up, creating obstacles and cover. The bodies of fallen Orks create literal mounds that living Orks must climb over to reach their enemies. This debris field actually works somewhat in the Orks' favor, as it provides cover and concealment that helps them approach the dreadnoughts, while the war machines find their mobility increasingly restricted by the clutter. The noise of this three-way battle is absolutely incredible, a cacophony that can be heard from miles away. It attracts attention from other forces in the area. Depending on the broader tactical situation, this might mean reinforcements for any of the three parties involved, or it might attract entirely new factions who want to investigate the source of such spectacular violence. The possibility of outside intervention adds urgency to the combat. Whoever wins needs to do so quickly before the situation becomes even more complicated. As the fight continues, attrition begins to tell. One or both dreadnoughts will eventually suffer critical damage. Systems fail, weapons jam or run out of ammunition, mobility is compromised. The pilots inside, if they're still conscious, are experiencing the accumulated stress of prolonged combat and system failures. For the loyalist, this might mean a calculated decision to withdraw or a determination to fight until destruction. For the Hellbrute, madness intensifies as damage accumulates, leading to increasingly erratic behavior. The Ork mob also suffers attrition, but their response is different. Heavy casualties that would break other forces only seem to excite Orks more. The surviving greenskins fight harder, driven by the WH40K energy and the thrill of battle. However, there is a tipping point. If casualties become truly catastrophic, if the war boss falls, or if it becomes clear that victory is impossible, even Orks might break off the attack. But that point is much further along than it would be for most other races. Orks will fight long past the point where other forces would have retreated, sustained by their joy in combat and their resistance to fear. The aftermath. Eventually, every battle ends, and the aftermath of a three-way fight between two dreadnoughts and an Ork mob is a scene of spectacular destruction. The landscape bears the scars of the conflict: craters, wreckage, and bodies scattered across a battlefield that has been transformed by violence. What happens next depends heavily on which forces survived and in what condition, but certain patterns emerge in these scenarios. The post-battle activities of the Orks, the fate of the Dreadnoughts, and the strategic implications of the engagement all contribute to understanding the full impact of this encounter. If the Orks are victorious, having destroyed or driven off both Dreadnoughts, they enter a phase that combines celebration, looting, and recovery. The immediate response is jubilation. The surviving Orks celebrate their victory with characteristic enthusiasm, firing weapons into the air, bellowing cries of triumph, and engaging in impromptu brawls that are more celebration than genuine combat. This celebration is important to Ork culture. It reinforces the social bonds of the mob and acknowledges the glory they've earned through successful violence. Once the initial celebration subsides, or more likely while it's still ongoing, the looting begins in earnest. The wreckage of one or two Dreadnoughts represents a treasure trove for Orks, particularly for mech boys who understand the value of such advanced technology. Teams of Orks descend on the broken war machines, tearing them apart with tools, improvised cutting equipment, and sometimes just their hands. They're looking for anything useful: weapon components, armor plates, power systems, ammunition, even the monitoring equipment inside the sarcophagi. The thoroughness of Ork scavenging is impressive. They'll strip a Dreadnought down to its frame given enough time. The most valuable components are claimed by the war boss or powerful nobs, either for their personal use or to be given to favored mech boys for incorporation into Ork war machines. Dreadnought weapons might be mounted on Ork vehicles or fortifications. Armor plates might be welded onto battle wagons or worn by particularly ambitious nobs. Power systems might be repurposed to drive Ork technology, though whether they'll actually work for non-space marine equipment is questionable. The Orks don't really care. They'll try to use whatever they've looted, and if it doesn't work, they'll hit it until it does, or move on to something else. The sarcophagus itself, if intact, presents an interesting problem for the Orks. What to do with the space marine pilot inside? Some Orks might not even realize there's a living being in there, seeing only machinery. Others might discover the pilot and have to decide his fate. Options include keeping him as a bizarre trophy, attempting to interrogate him, likely unsuccessfully given the Ork's lack of subtlety, or simply killing him out of hand. The fate of the pilot often depends on whether the war boss finds the discovery interesting or not. A particularly curious or innovative war boss might even try to plug an Ork into the sarcophagus, though such experiments rarely end well. The bodies of fallen Orks receive minimal attention from their surviving comrades. Orks don't mourn their dead in the way humans do. A dead Ork is just dead. He had his time and his fights, and now he's done. Some looting of the Ork corpses occurs, with weapons and equipment being redistributed among the living. The bodies themselves are often left where they fell, contributing to the spore problem that makes Ork infestations so difficult to eliminate. Each dead Ork will eventually spawn new Orks through their fungal spores, creating a persistent green skin presence in the area. If one or both Dreadnoughts survive the engagement, either through victory over the Orks or through successful withdrawal, they face their own aftermath challenges. A damaged Dreadnought must somehow make it back to friendly forces. No easy task when systems are failing and enemies potentially still lurk nearby. The pilot must use every bit of remaining power and his centuries of experience to survive. The journey back is often as dangerous as the battle itself, with the Dreadnought limping through enemy territory while alerts flash and systems shut down one by one. For a surviving loyalist Dreadnought, returning to his chapter brings medical attention for his systems and possibly a period of rest in stasis. But it also brings the weight of failure if he was unable to complete his objective, or if he had to abandon ground to the Orks. Space Marine culture values success and sacrifice. A dreadnought that survived when brothers died might feel a complex mix of relief and guilt, processed through a mind that has already endured centuries of service and loss. A surviving Hellbrute's fate depends on whether it returns to its Chaos Warband or is destroyed by its own allies. The mad fury that helped it survive the battle might make it dangerous to friend and foe alike. Chaos forces often chain their Hellbrutes between battles, and a Hellbrute that has tasted extended combat might resist such confinement violently. The aftermath for the Hellbrute pilot is continued torment, as it always is, the brief respite of battle giving way to the eternal nightmare of consciousness without release. The strategic implications of the engagement ripple outward beyond the immediate participants. The area where the battle occurred is now marked as a location where significant forces clashed and where valuable equipment was destroyed. Other factions will take note. Imperial forces might attempt recovery missions to retrieve gene seed from fallen Marines or to deny the Orks access to the technology. Chaos forces might investigate what happened to their Hellbrute. The Orks, flush with victory and loot, are likely to push further into the area, emboldened by their success. The stories that emerge from the battle take on a life of their own. The surviving Orks who witnessed or participated in the fight tell and retell the tale, each iteration adding embellishments and exaggerations. The story spreads through the Ork warband and potentially beyond, becoming part of the collective mythology of that particular wag. Remember that time we found the two big metal Yumis crumping each other? Becomes a shared reference point, a moment of glory that strengthens the bonds within the mob. Among Imperial forces, the loss of a dreadnought is a tragedy that resonates through the chapter. These venerable ancients represent not just military assets, but living links to the past, repositories of knowledge and experience that cannot be replaced. Their loss diminishes the chapter in ways that go beyond mere combat effectiveness. Memorial services are held. The dreadnought's deeds are recorded in the chapter's history. His name joins the long roster of honored dead who have served and fallen across the millennia. The circumstances of his final battle, including the intervention of the Orks, become part of this record, a warning and a lesson for future generations. For Chaos forces, the loss of a Hellbrute is less emotionally significant, but still represents a valuable asset destroyed. The Dark Mechanicum might attempt to recover the wreckage if possible, eager to study what damage was inflicted and how it might be prevented in future constructions. The warband that lost the Hellbrute might seek revenge against the Orks, adding another thread to the complex web of conflicts that characterize the 41st millennium. The physical aftermath includes long-term changes to the battlefield itself. The area where the fight occurred is now contaminated with Ork spores that will spawn new greenskins. The wreckage, if not completely looted, remains as a landmark and potential source of salvage for years to come. Scavengers of various species might visit the site, looking for anything the Orks missed. The ground itself bears permanent scars, craters and blast marks that will remain visible for decades or longer. In some cases, the aftermath includes unexpected developments. A particularly innovative mechboy might successfully integrate dreadnought technology into an Ork creation, producing a hybrid war machine that combines space marine durability with Ork enthusiasm. A tech priest recovering Imperial equipment from the battlefield might find evidence of what occurred, leading to intelligence about Ork capabilities and movements. A Chaos sorcerer might use the psychic residue from the battle, particularly if a Hellbrute died violently, to fuel dark rituals or summonings. The aftermath also includes lessons learned, though the degree to which various factions actually learn varies. Space Marine commanders analyzing the battle might develop new tactics for dealing with Ork mobs when dreadnought support is available. They might recommend different deployment patterns or support requirements for dreadnoughts operating in Ork-heavy theaters. Chaos warbands might draw conclusions about when to commit their precious Hellbrutes and when to hold them in reserve. The Orks, characteristically, learn the most practical lessons. They have now fought Dreadnoughts and know what to expect in future encounters. They understand better how much force is required to bring down such a target. They know which weapons and tactics worked and which didn't. This knowledge spreads through the warband and makes them more effective in future engagements against similar enemies. In a very real sense, the battle has educated the Orks, though they would never describe it in such terms. Historical examples and lore connections. While the specific scenario of Orks discovering two enemy dreadnoughts fighting each other might not be extensively documented in the official lore of Warhammer 40,000, the underlying elements of this encounter are reflected throughout the history of the setting. The interactions between Orks and Space Marine dreadnoughts, the multi-faction battles, and the general chaos of warfare in the 41st Millennium all have numerous precedents that help us understand how such scenarios would play out. Examining these historical examples and lore connections provides additional depth to our exploration. The Battle of Cardrum offers insights into multi-faction warfare involving Orks and Space Marines. While this battle involved Necrons rather than Chaos forces, it demonstrates how the sudden appearance of a third faction can completely transform an engagement. The White Scars found themselves trapped between Orks and Necrons, forced to make rapid tactical adjustments as the situation evolved. The tactical flexibility required when facing multiple opponents simultaneously is directly relevant to our scenario. Space Marine forces, whether in Dreadnought chassis or not, must be prepared to instantly reassess priorities when new enemies appear. The War of the Beast, the massive Ork invasion of the Imperium that occurred in the 32nd Millennium, included numerous accounts of Dreadnoughts fighting against overwhelming Ork numbers. These historical battles established patterns for how Space Marines and their ancient warriors respond to greenskin threats. The Dreadnoughts of that era, fighting against Orks of unprecedented size and organization, had to adapt their tactics to deal with enemies who combined massive numbers with surprising tactical sophistication. The lessons from those ancient battles remain relevant, informing how modern chapters deploy their Dreadnoughts in Ork-heavy war zones. The Armageddon Wars provide extensive documentation of Ork behavior in protracted campaigns against Imperial forces. These conflicts, stretching over decades and involving billions of combatants, included countless instances of Orks interrupting battles between other forces. The greenskin tendency to insert themselves into any nearby conflict, their love of spectacular violence, and their opportunistic looting are all well documented in the records of Armageddon. These patterns help predict how Orks would likely respond to discovering any impressive battle, including one between Dreadnoughts. Throughout the Horus Heresy and the 10 millennia since, encounters between Loyalist and traitor Dreadnoughts have been recorded across countless battlefields. These duels between ancient warriors often carry personal significance, as Dreadnoughts might face former brothers who turned to Chaos or Loyalists they once knew before their fall. The psychological weight of these encounters adds layers of tragedy to the violence. When Orks intrude upon such battles, they're completely oblivious to this history and meaning, seeing only two impressive war machines fighting, which somehow makes their intervention even more absurd from an outside perspective. The lore surrounding Ork looting behavior establishes that greenskins have successfully salvaged and repurposed technology from virtually every other faction in the galaxy. The famous looted wagons represent Imperial vehicles that have been captured and modified by Orks. While Dreadnoughts are relatively rare compared to standard vehicles, there are almost certainly instances throughout Imperial history where Orks have managed to loot Dreadnought components and incorporate them into their own war machines. The Death Skulls clan in particular has a reputation for being able to loot anything, and it wouldn't be surprising if somewhere in the galaxy there's a Death Skull battle wagon sporting armor plates scavenged from a Dreadnought. The relationship between Orks and combat entertainment is explored throughout their lore. The culture of WH40K includes elements of performance and audience, with Orks genuinely enjoying spectacular battles even when they're not directly involved. The fact that orcs will sometimes pause in their own fighting to watch something particularly impressive is well established. This behavior pattern supports our analysis of how orcs would respond to discovering fighting dreadnoughts, initially stopping to appreciate the spectacle before deciding whether to intervene. The concept of three-way battles appears frequently in Warhammer 40,000 lore, reflecting the reality of a galaxy where numerous factions compete for supremacy. Battles where Imperial, Chaos, and Xenos forces all fight in the same theater are not uncommon. These conflicts are even more chaotic than standard warfare, with shifting alliances of convenience, targets of opportunity, and the constant possibility that focusing on one enemy will leave you vulnerable to another. Our scenario fits comfortably within this established pattern of multi-faction warfare. The psychological aspects of Dreadnought service, particularly the isolation and sensory deprivation that pilots experience, are explored in various sources. The fact that this service is considered an honor despite its terrible costs speaks to Space Marine culture and their dedication to continued service. When we consider how a Dreadnought pilot might react to suddenly facing not just his original enemy, but also a mob of orcs, we must account for his altered state of consciousness, his combat experience spanning centuries, and his commitment to completing his mission regardless of personal cost. The mad fury of Hellbrutes and their unpredictable behavior in combat is well documented in Chaos Space Marine lore. These corrupted war machines are depicted as both terrifying weapons and problematic assets, as likely to cause friendly fire casualties as to effectively engage the enemy. The fact that Chaos forces chain their Hellbrutes between battles indicates the level of danger they represent, even to their own side. This established behavior pattern helps us understand how a Hellbrute might respond to the sudden appearance of an orc mob, with violence that might be directed at the new threat, the original enemy, or possibly both in rapid succession. The broader strategic context of how orcs spread and persist in the galaxy is relevant to our scenario's aftermath. The spore-based reproduction of orcs means that any battlefield where they fought will likely spawn new greenskin populations. This makes orc eradication incredibly difficult and explains why even tactical defeats don't significantly reduce the orc threat over time. The site of a major battle involving hundreds of orcs will become a greenskin infestation point, requiring sustained extermination efforts to clear. Throughout Imperial history, there are accounts of recovery missions to retrieve fallen dreadnoughts, or at least their sarcophagi and gene seed. The value placed on these relics by Space Marine chapters means that leaving a dreadnought's remains to be looted by orcs is considered unacceptable if there's any possibility of recovery. This creates follow-on missions and conflicts as Imperial forces attempt to reclaim what was lost, while orcs defend their loot. These secondary battles can sometimes be larger and more significant than the original engagement. Conclusion. The scenario we've explored, what happens when orcs discover two enemy dreadnoughts fighting each other, encapsulates so much of what makes Warhammer 40,000 such a compelling setting. It combines tragic heroism, brutal warfare, dark humor, and the constant chaos that defines life in the 41st millennium. The Space Marine dreadnoughts represent heroes who have sacrificed everything for their cause, preserved in walking tombs to fight forever. The Hellbrute embodies the corruption and horror of chaos, a twisted reflection of what once was noble. And the orcs bring their own unique perspective, viewing the whole thing as entertainment before deciding whether to join in the fun. What makes this scenario particularly interesting is how it reveals the fundamental differences between these factions. The Space Marines, whether loyalist or traitor, are fighting for ideological reasons, pursuing objectives and doctrines that have been refined over millennia. They approach warfare with tactical sophistication and grim determination. The orcs, by contrast, fight because fighting is what they do. They don't need strategic reasons or tactical objectives beyond that looks like a good scrap. This juxtaposition of mindsets creates situations that are simultaneously absurd and deadly serious. The tragedy of the Dreadnoughts is highlighted by the Ork perspective. These ancient warriors, who have served for centuries beyond their natural lifespan, enduring isolation and sensory deprivation for the sake of duty, find themselves as entertainment for a mob of greenskins who don't understand or care about any of that history or sacrifice. The Orks see impressive war machines fighting, not the accumulated weight of millennia of service and suffering. This contrast between how the factions view the same situation speaks to the fundamental irony at the heart of Warhammer 40,000. In a galaxy of endless war, even the most meaningful conflicts can become just another day's entertainment for those who live only to fight. The scenario also demonstrates the practical realities of warfare in the 41st millennium. No battle occurs in isolation. Other forces are always nearby, always ready to intervene or take advantage of weakness. A conflict between two enemies can instantly become a three-way free-for-all with the arrival of a third faction. This constant uncertainty, the knowledge that any tactical situation can change dramatically and without warning, is part of what makes warfare in this setting so brutal and so difficult to survive. From an Ork perspective, this encounter represents the best kind of day. They got to watch an amazing fight. They probably got to participate in that fight, and if things went well, they ended up with valuable loot and bragging rights. The fact that dozens or hundreds of their fellows died in the process is unfortunate, but not particularly tragic from a greenskin viewpoint. Those Orks had good deaths in a good fight, which is really all any Ork can hope for. The survivors will tell stories about this battle for years, possibly decades if it was particularly impressive, and those stories will become part of the accumulated legend of their WAG. For Imperial forces, scenarios like this represent the constant challenge of fighting a multi-front war against numerous enemies. Space Marine chapters must be prepared to face not just their primary opponents, but also opportunistic attacks from other factions. The loss of a Dreadnought to Ork intervention while engaged with Chaos forces is a tragedy, but it's also a tactical lesson about the importance of situational awareness and the need for supporting forces when deploying such valuable assets. Future deployments will account for the possibility of multi-faction encounters, adjusting tactics and force composition accordingly. The broader implications for understanding Warhammer 40,000 lore are significant. This scenario illustrates how the various factions interact, how warfare operates on multiple levels simultaneously, and how the cultural and psychological differences between factions shape their behavior. It shows us that Orks are more than mindless brutes. They have their own logic, values, and decision-making processes, even if those processes seem alien to other races. It demonstrates the terrible nature of Dreadnought service and the different ways that Loyalist and Chaos forces pervert this technology. It reminds us that in the 41st millennium, no one is safe, not even ancient heroes in armored walking tombs. The entertainment value that Orks derive from watching combat speaks to a deeper truth about the setting. In a galaxy defined by eternal war, where billions die in conflicts that rage for centuries, violence becomes normalized to the point where it can be appreciated aesthetically. The Orks are simply honest about this appreciation, whereas other races dress up their relationship with violence in rhetoric about duty, honor, or survival. The Greenskins understand that they exist to fight, and they've embraced this reality completely, finding joy in what other races view as necessary evil. As we conclude this exploration, consider what it would actually be like to be in this scenario from different perspectives. Imagine being the Loyalist Dreadnought pilot, already engaged in a desperate fight against a corrupted reflection of what you once were, when hundreds of Orks suddenly appear and start cheering. The surreal quality of that moment, the instant recalculation of tactics, the knowledge that survival has just become much more complicated. Or imagine being an Ork in that crowd, witnessing the most spectacular fight you've seen in months, trying to decide whether watching or participating would be more fun. Or imagine being the Hellbrute, mad and tormented, barely aware of what's happening beyond the immediate violence, suddenly surrounded by new targets that mock you with their vital presence. This scenario, like so much of Warhammer 40,000, doesn't have a happy ending. Someone will die, probably many someones. Equipment will be destroyed. Strategic objectives will be compromised. The war will continue, as it always does, grinding forward across a million worlds with no end in sight. But within that grim reality, there are moments of dark humor, spectacular violence, and the strange beauty of beings operating according to their nature, however brutal or alien that nature might be. The next time you encounter Warhammer 40,000 lore, or play games set in this universe, remember that scenarios like this are constantly playing out across the galaxy. In some forgotten war zone, at this very moment in the setting's timeline, Orks are probably discovering enemies fighting each other and having to decide whether to watch or join in. Space Marines are deploying their ancient heroes into desperate situations where survival is never guaranteed. Chaos forces are unleashing corrupted war machines that are as dangerous to allies as to enemies. And somewhere, a three-way battle is creating new legends that will be told and retold for generations, at least among those who survive to do the telling. So, if you've enjoyed this deep dive into what happens when Orks find two enemy Dreadnoughts fighting, please like and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with your fellow Warhammer fans. Leave comments about your own favorite scenarios or battles from the lore. And remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But sometimes that war provides quite the spectacle for those who appreciate such things. The Emperor protects, but the Orks just want a good scrap. And in the end, everyone gets what they came for. More violence in a galaxy that can never have enough.